In the late 1800s, Fort Wayne was a city in transition. What is now the hustle and bustle of Indiana's second largest city was emerging from a sleepy little farming community perched at the highest point on the Wabash and Erie Canal. As railroads replaced canals, factories moved in, and the city doubled its population by 1900. On the edge of town, the poor handmaids of Jesus Christ had cared for the sick at St. Joseph Hospital since 1869. But the growing community required more care than one hospital could provide. In the fall of 1878, at the urging of Dr. William H. Myers, a small group of community-minded women set about to raise funds and organize a community-owned hospital. These pioneers were led by Susan Williams, the wife of Jesse L. Williams, one of Fort Wayne's most prominent citizens. By late October 1878, Fort Wayne City Hospital cared for its first patients in the former home of local entrepreneur William S. Edsel. But this location in the heart of the city was short-lived, and hopes for a more permanent building on the property were soon dashed.
Our stay in these quarters was of short duration, for protest after protest was hurled at the institution, threats of this, that, and the other if we did not immediately move our pest house out of the neighborhood.
Undaunted, the hospital relocated to a home about a mile away from the city center. For several years, the 18-bed hospital relieved the suffering of patients by the glow of gas lamps without the luxury of indoor plumbing. When telephone technology arrived, Fort Wayne City Hospital answered. In the summer of 1879, the Fort Wayne Sentinel reported that Dr. Myers sent a prescription by telephone from City Hospital to Myers Brothers Drugstore, and it was promptly filled. By the late 1880s, City Hospital's success in caring for the sick led to the need for growth.
With an increase of patients came an increase of expense, and it was now evident that a more systematic and businesslike step must be taken. This resolved into the idea of purchasing a boarding house.
That boarding house was owned by notable businessman Oliver S. Hanna, then City Hospital's board secretary. It was considerably larger than the hospital's previous home and was the first building the young hospital purchased outright. Financing was made possible by donations from 3 Lutheran congregations, as well as from Jesse L. Williams, who donated almost a third of the purchase price to honor his wife Susan on their 50th wedding anniversary. This generosity left the hospital with only a small mortgage, but with an even smaller bank balance. In 1890, the hospital's debt continued to grow. Despite this, the Fort Wayne City Hospital Board approved a major addition to the hospital. Once again, the Williams family stepped in to help. The children of Jesse and Susan Williams donated 2/3 of the construction cost for the addition in honor of their parents, who had both recently passed away. The generosity of the Williams family inspired the hospital board to offer to rename the hospital in honor of Susan Williams. But the Williams family declined the honor and instead suggested the name Hope.
The name of Fort Wayne City Hospital is hereby changed to Hope Hospital of the City of Fort Wayne, Indiana, as suggested and recommended by the family of the late Jesse L. Williams.
The addition opened its doors March 17, 1892. It featured an operating room designed and financed by famed surgeon Dr. Miles F. Porter. The walls of this innovative room were windows, allowing ample natural light in the days before electric light was common. The floor was concrete, so it could be thoroughly cleaned before each operation. Soon, attention was turned to developing the nursing staff. In 1897, Hope Hospital Superintendent Gertrude Fournier founded Fort Wayne's first nursing school. The first class of 8 young women graduated from Hope Hospital Training School for Nurses in 1900. 2 years later, in 1902, the hospital was again remodeled and expanded to better serve the fast-growing community. Hope Hospital almost doubled patient capacity. But while affording much-needed beds for more patients, the project also swelled the hospital's debt. 1903 saw the Lutheran congregations shift their support and establish Lutheran Hospital. Hope Hospital's financial situation had become desperate. Samuel Foster, founding president of the Lincoln National Life Insurance Company, was then 3 years into his chairmanship of the hospital's board. He challenged local church leaders to help rescue the strapped hospital. Foster's effort failed. Through the early 1900s, attempt after attempt to raise the needed funds fell short. By 1914, the building and most of its equipment had fallen into disrepair. The hospital's 3rd floor was closed as a cost-cutting measure. One last fund drive was held but reached only half its goal, and the hospital remained buried beneath a mountain of debt. With no way to stave off creditors, the hospital's demise seemed imminent. Hope Hospital Board Chairman Andrew Burry organized a meeting in late 1915 with representatives of local churches and synagogues to discuss Hope Hospital's future. The religious leaders set about assembling a board of representatives from 24 Protestant churches and 2 synagogues to take over management of the floundering hospital. The new board's first order of business was debt. The second was building a new hospital. Andrew Burry, who continued as board chairman, happened to also be leading the local YMCA's effort to find a new building. To help both institutions, the YMCA purchased the hospital building and land for an amount equal to the hospital's debt. Land for a new 6-story, 102-bed Hope Hospital was purchased just over a mile south of Fort Wayne's downtown. The new board quickly learned hard lessons about fundraising. Only half the money needed to build the new facility was raised, and the project was scrapped. Hope Hospital was now free of debt and under new management, but without a permanent home. In 1917, as key hospital personnel prepared for Army medical service in France, Hope Hospital found a new home. The Ways Sanatorium had been built in 1914 by Dr. Albert Macbeth. It was originally designed to treat patients with water from a mineral spring, but that idea dried up, leaving Dr. Macbeth with an empty 6-story building in the heart of downtown Fort Wayne. He knew that Andrew Burry had a hospital without a building, and the two men met with an eye toward solving each other's problems. Hope Hospital agreed to move into the sanatorium, rent-free, on Dr. Macbeth's sole condition that he maintain the use of the 2 front offices. But the hospital's ongoing transition to the new board and now the new building was fraught with difficulty. Dr. Miles F. Porter, preeminent surgeon and longtime chief of medical staff for Hope Hospital, believed the hospital should continue to operate with a group of hand-picked physicians, a closed staff. But board chair Andrew Burry believed in the open staff model, with all qualified physicians welcome to practice at the hospital. The dispute peaked in June 1917 as the hospital prepared to move into Ways Sanatorium. The nurses were pulled into the fray.
The spokesperson for the nurses told us last Friday that they would not come unless Dr. Porter told them to. Well, they can come here if they care to, and all that come will be given fair treatment. Those who do not come will find their places quickly filled by other nurses. We can get plenty of nurses. You may be assured that the nurses' strike does not bother us at all.
As the World War raged on in Europe, and the battle for women's suffrage marched into Washington, D.C., an armistice was reached in Fort Wayne between the board and the physicians. In July 1917, Hope Hospital opened in its new location. The truce did not last long. By winter, poor working conditions, long hours, and no pay for student nurses combined to spark new rumors of a nurses' strike. In response, the hospital board discharged the entire nursing staff in December and replaced it with nurses from Methodist Hospital in Indianapolis. Finally, the constant strife between the board, medical staff, and nurses took its toll, and 9 days into the new year of 1918, the board voted to close the hospital and the training school for nurses. As soon as Hope Hospital closed its doors, Way's Hospital opened as its successor, promising an entirely new management and new corps of nurses. This marked the beginning of negotiations for the takeover of the hospital by the Methodist Hospital and Deaconess Home Association of Indiana. This association, organized through Methodist Hospital in Indianapolis, wished to establish a statewide healthcare system. In May 1918, a deal was reached. Hope Methodist Hospital would be run by a local advisory board reporting to and working under the authority of Methodist Hospital in Indianapolis. With the hospital now fully under Methodist ownership, Hope was dropped from the name, and students were once again admitted to the nurses' training school. One constant through all these changes was the hospital's shaky financial condition. Area Methodist leaders lent a hand, committing an annual operating subsidy called sustentation.
We were continually having trouble getting enough money, so that at the conference they voted to give the Fort Wayne board the income from their sustenation fund, about $10,000 a year.
Through the 1920s, this cash infusion kept the Methodist Hospital of Fort Wayne afloat. But with persistent debt and the Great Depression just around the corner, the future of the small hospital did not look healthy. The early 20th century was a time of rapid development in Fort Wayne. With its status as a rail hub and its proximity to some of the fastest-growing cities in the nation, Fort Wayne had established itself as a manufacturing center. But this reliance on heavy industry led to hard times during the Great Depression. Although the city did not bear the initial brunt of the 1929 economic crash, it could not stand long against the tide of financial misfortune. During the Depression, Methodist Hospital of Fort Wayne found itself walking a tightrope with only the net of a modest monthly stipend of cash from the Methodist Church. The hospital fell deeper into debt. Dr. M.F. Steele, hospital superintendent since 1921, worked heroically to maintain the care of Fort Wayne citizens while the building around him crumbled. He stepped down from his post in the depths of the economic calamity in 1932. The leadership void was quickly addressed by the local Methodist Church, which invited Ezra T. Franklin to Fort Wayne to discuss taking over the hospital. Franklin, who held a Ph.D. in divinity in the Methodist Church, had come from Union College, a small Methodist university in Kentucky. There, he was credited with saving the school from certain demise. He had built a reputation within the church as someone who could turn around a struggling institution. This was just the type of man the Methodist Hospital of Fort Wayne needed. After meeting with former hospital board members Andrew Burry and Sam Foster, and with Dr. John G. Benson, superintendent of Methodist Hospitals of Indiana, Dr. Franklin was convinced the Methodist Hospital of Fort Wayne needed him. Saving the failing institution required drastic, sweeping changes, and Dr. Franklin wasted no time. He first slashed employee pay by up to 25%. In turn, Dr. Franklin accepted only half what the former superintendent was paid, and raised fees for the township trustees, raised standards for the nursing school, raised funds from the local Methodist churches, and raised awareness of every bit of wasteful spending he discovered. This was harsh medicine, but the hospital was able to turn the financial corner. Once faced with closure, it would soon lead the way in Fort Wayne healthcare. With Methodist Hospital of Fort Wayne finally on solid footing, Dr. Franklin and the hospital board turned an eye toward the future. From the moment Dr. Franklin arrived, his mind was set on returning the hospital to the citizens of Fort Wayne. Because of the years of accumulated debt in Fort Wayne, the Methodist Hospital Association of Indiana was more than happy to strike a deal. In 1936, it agreed to sell the hospital to the citizens of Fort Wayne over 5 years, provided the public could raise the funds needed for the purchase. With the sale arranged and the hospital's future looking brighter, Dr. Franklin began to think about growing the hospital instead of just sustaining it. He knew that growth would require a larger facility, so he began to scout out properties large enough to accommodate a modern hospital. In the spring of 1939, he found the perfect spot. Just outside the northeast city limits, at State Street and Randalia Drive. He purchased 18 acres of what was then known as Randall Woods. The money was donated by the people of Fort Wayne in small gifts of $50 to $100. The site was dedicated as Methodist Hospital Park.
I roamed that track many times and dreamed over and over of a beautiful new hospital someday of 500 beds, a great training school, and all else to go with them.
By 1941, the hospital was free of debt and had money in the bank. It had acquired land suitable for a new facility and was consistently receiving donations from the community. All this led the Methodist Hospital Association of Indiana to consider backing out of the 1936 deal. But it relented and accepted the money raised by the citizens of Fort Wayne to buy back their local community hospital. With this, the Fort Wayne Methodist Hospital was established as a local entity run by a local board to serve the community. The dream of expansion seemed within reach, and the hospital board began raising funds in 1943 to build a new, larger hospital. One of the first donations, and one of the largest, came from Dr. Calvin English, the medical director for the Lincoln National Life Insurance Company. He had a love for medicine, education, and philanthropy. But the fund drive ended just short of its goal, and with the United States in the midst of World War II, plans for a new hospital were put on hold indefinitely. Yearning to return to an academic setting, Dr. Franklin decided to leave the hospital shortly after the war ended in 1946. Dr. Franklin's shoes were not easy to fill. Fort Wayne Methodist Hospital went through a succession of superintendents. Once, between chief administrators, Lucille Morris, who had started as a switchboard operator in 1924, stepped in to handle the facility's day-to-day operations. The absence of strong, long-term leadership left the institution adrift, without a plan or goal on which to focus its efforts. In 1949, Clyde Cover, legal counsel for the Lincoln National Life Insurance Company, took the reins of the board in order to, as he put it, do something with respect to the subject of building a new hospital, either to fan the embers of purpose to a fusing heat, or else to make an end of the fiasco. He had been on the board for only 2 years when he was elected president, but he had shown such a passion for the hospital, there was no doubt He was the leader needed to right the ship. Clyde Cover spent the summer of 1949 convincing board members of the wisdom of building a new hospital on the land purchased 10 years earlier at State and Randalia. But the cost to build new seemed prohibitive, and the board was poised to move forward to enlarge the existing hospital. At that point, fate stepped in the form of a federal grant. The Hill-Burton Act was enacted by Congress after World War II to encourage modernization and expansion of hospitals across the U.S. At that time, the federal government would provide a grant for up to half the construction cost of a new hospital. These dollars brought the cost of building the new Parkview very close to the cost of expanding the old Methodist building. Even with these funds available, though, the board still wasn't convinced until Dr. Franklin returned with an impassioned speech which turned the tide. Parkview Memorial Hospital was moving from being a dream to becoming a reality. Fundraising began anew. Despite early troubles, between January and June of 1950, tens of thousands of dollars were pledged. Hospital leaders achieved more than 150% of their goal. Don Carner was hired as superintendent to help guide the hospital through the construction and transition to its new home. Renowned architect A.M. Strauss was brought in to complete plans for the hospital. Strauss had designed the Lincoln Tower, the Embassy Theater, and many other prominent local landmarks, assuring Parkview would be an architectural asset to the surrounding neighborhood. Before construction could begin, the Randall Woods had to be cleared. On a cold January morning in 1951, 234 volunteers assembled at State and Randalia to remove the brush by hand and prepare the land for construction. With the land ready, on August 12, 1951, ground was broken for the 242-bed, 4-story facility set on a beautiful park-like campus. I have personally watched the hospital building rise out of the ground since the first shovelful of dirt was lifted. My visits have been at least weekly, but in the wintertime they were daily. I am of the firm belief that the building is being constructed strong and well, and it is my fervent hope that it may stand for 1,000 years in the service of the community. Clyde Cover. Construction continued into 1952, but with the war in Korea, building costs skyrocketed. The decision was made to hold yet another fund drive. At this same time, the Lutheran Hospital across town was also looking to expand its building. The two hospital boards met and decided to join forces in an unprecedented united fund drive. This approach was a great success. Both institutions' goals were quickly met and exceeded, and enough money was raised to build the Parkview Methodist School of Nursing on the southwest corner of the Parkview campus. This dormitory and school also received a major donation from Mary Tower English, whose husband, Dr. Calvin English, was one of the first donors in the initial fund drive. In honor of their love of medicine, education, and philanthropy, the building was named English Hall. In November of 1953, 40,000 bags of concrete poured, 54 miles of plumbing installed, and 3,000 panes of glass hung, construction was completed. On November 8, 1953, the 75th anniversary of the founding of Fort Wayne City Hospital, Parkview Memorial Hospital was dedicated and opened for the people of Fort Wayne to tour. We are acting on the premise that if we can develop an outstanding hospital in the old building, we should have little trouble making good at Parkview. On the morning of November 21st, 1953, the stage was set. The funds raised, construction completed, and building dedicated. The only thing missing was patience. The plan set forth by then Superintendent Don Carner was to move all patients and equipment from Methodist to Parkview between 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. The relocation was made possible by helping hands from the community. The Truck Drivers Union Local 414 and the Fort Wayne Truck Owners Association, civil defense workers, city policemen, sheriff's deputies, mechanics, White Cross volunteer women, Fort Wayne Radio Club members, taxi cab drivers, and many others all pitched in. 27 trucks were enlisted to help, along with 10 taxis and, according to reports of the day, every ambulance in Fort Wayne. All the extra help was volunteered. The move began at 8 a.m., with Assistant Superintendent Stan Nelson supervising on the Methodist side and Lucille Morris receiving the equipment at Parkview's delivery entrance. Transfer of 64 patients, including 12 infants, began at 9 a.m. with the trucks, ambulance, and police cruiser escorts assembling in the west parking lot of the new hospital. After everyone had arrived, the Reverend Christian Coker, pastor of the Forest Park Methodist Church, led the group in a prayer for safe and comfortable patient transfers. Floor by floor and one by one, patients were brought to the lobby of Methodist and gently transferred to their new Parkview beds. Those beds were rolled out the door and truck drivers strained to lift their precious loads into the waiting vehicles. Once on the truck, a nurse accompanied each patient to their new Parkview room. 2 times that day, each truck made the 3-mile trip from the heart of the city to an area which at that time was considered the suburbs. Patients who were not bedridden were accompanied by a nurse and transported in taxicabs. En route, crowds gathered to watch the procession. They saw motorcycle police escorting semi-trucks with white flags emblazoned with red crosses strapped to their front bumpers. Following closely were the ambulances and taxis. City police, county sheriff's deputies, and the local Civil Defense Corps cleared the streets and blocked traffic at all 50 intersections between the two facilities to ensure the speedy delivery of the delicate cargo. When they arrived at the large circle drive of the new Parkview Memorial Hospital, patients were gently lowered from the trucks while newspaper photographers snapped photos. Radio station WOWO reported minute-by-minute details in a live broadcast. Each patient was wheeled through the hospital's front door and into the modern, spacious lobby, where head nurse Marie Coulter directed the incoming flow. Arriving on their assigned floor, the accompanying nurse turned each patient's records over to the nurse's station and escorted the patient to their new room. After a long morning, the last patient was checked into Parkview at 12:05 p.m. With patients all safe in their new rooms, full attention was turned to the task of completing the transfer of equipment from what was that day forward known as the Old Methodist. So efficient was the moving process, the first surgery at Parkview was performed later that evening, and the first baby was born in the new hospital at 2:02 a.m. the morning after the move. 6 babies, including a set of twins, were born that Sunday. On Tuesday evening, according to the minutes of the first official meeting of the Board of Directors of Parkview Memorial Hospital, Superintendent Don Carner paid tribute to the wonderful community spirit and helpful response in what became known as Operation Big Switch. By the end of 1953, only a few weeks after the move, Clyde Cover reported to the hospital board that a total of 849 adults and children were patients, while 229 babies were born and 415 operations were performed at Parkview. Their recovery was speedy, in cheerful, comfortable surroundings with every modern device from electrically operated hospital beds in each room all the way to attractively served meals individually ordered by each patient. Cover's report concluded, these 849 adults and children and 229 newborn infants had the hospital beds they needed when they needed them because of the generosity of the citizens of Fort Wayne. After 3 fund drives, 26 months of construction, and 75 years of inadequate facilities, the dream of Parkview Memorial Hospital had been fulfilled.